Good morning, everyone. I'm coming to you from the Ann Judson room today. And you'll find out in just a few brief moments. I wanted to have the wonderful quilt hanging behind me, just a beautiful piece of artwork, but then also the couch, because there have been some really precious moments when I have been here working or come into a meeting and I find one of you napping on the couch. And to tell you the truth, I've taken a nap there too myself, and it kind of fits with what we're talking about this past year of rest. And well, sometimes we're exhausted after this year. We need stuff like that. Also, as you can see, I'm wearing suspenders. I was going to wear a tie, but man, I just haven't been able to wear a tie or a bow tie, this past year. I'm sure I will again, but it's kind of hard to. But this is my clergy tartan pair of suspenders, so I wanted to try and make it as special as possible. There we are. Felt kind of weird preaching in a robe sitting down. So this is what we got. So here we go. I'm going to read this. So I'm going to be looking down a little bit. There we go. It's longer than usual. I'm not making excuses for it. I'm just preparing you for it. It's going to be a different experience, but I ask that you, once again, stay with me for this sermon. I'm going to tell a story that I find moving, and I think you will as well. Here now we begin. Thank you, Rich, for the reading of John 3:14-21. 1 year ago, the Judson Council met here in this room after worship to discuss what to do. That weekend, my Facebook feed was full of posts from other churches saying that they would not have service that coming Sunday a year ago, and they were not for sure what the future would bring. Now, it wasn't all of them, but we held out, not trying to be heroes or anything ridiculous like that. We just needed to get together and kind of discuss how we were going to do this. We thought that the pandemic would be a short time. We thought that, okay, it's Lent, we might not celebrate Easter together, but we'll definitely celebrate Easter when we celebrate Pentecost. Easter came and went. Pentecost came and went. 4th of July came and went. Labor Day came and went. Rally Day came and went. Halloween came and went. All Saints Day came and went. Judson's 111th birthday party came and went. Advent, Christmas, Epiphany, Jazz Sunday, Ash Wednesday. And here we are, the 4th Sunday of Lent, and we still have time to go. Yes, there is some light at the end of the, we can see some light streaming in. Some of you have not only been vaccinated, but double vaccinated. Cases have somewhat plateaued here in the state. But we all know that it'll be a while before we are back together in the building. Now, this summer and late spring, hopefully we can do some things outdoors and some creative ways. But, here in the building, probably not until Rally Day. And think about this, yours truly, because I'm under 50 and healthy, I'll be one of the last people vaccinated other than the kids. And, I didn't take a vow of poverty, chastity, or obedience. And I didn't take a vow of martyrdom as well. So let's all give ourselves some grace as we become vaccinated and acclimated to this life together again. And let's just say it has been one hell of a year. The sheer loss, the gravity, the amount of loss. Church members have died. The numbers of you who have lost parents, siblings, loved ones. Neighbors have died. The child of a friend of mine died. Jobs that were lost. Marriages that didn't make it. Patterns shattered. Rituals evaporated. Rites of passage just didn't get to take place. Now let's not downplay the loss. It was real. And we need to sit with it and not run from it. The pandemic also revealed fissures in our society. Systemic racism was exposed and nowhere to hide. We saw what happens to the earth, that it begins to heal itself when we just stop traveling as much. We see the unfairness of healthcare that's linked to a job. If you have a job, you have health care. If you're out of a job, you don't have health care. We saw the economic disparity. We saw that some kids who have access to resources were able to make it during distance learning. But those who don't have access to resources were struggling. How about the kids who had to sit outside of a McDonald's so they could be on the Wi-Fi? There were major exposures that happened, revealings that took place during this pandemic. And yet, in the midst of all this trauma and loss, I want to say that Judson Church found new life. Now, I confess that there were some bleak days early on in this pandemic. One particular day, I was walking around Todd Park and I was wondering if Judson would make it. I was wondering, do I need to start looking for a job, another job? I was wondering, would there even be a church left to pastor? Not just Judson Church, but the church in general after this pandemic. Into the space of not knowing what was going on, lots of experts filled that vacuum with all kind of programs and pronouncements and memos and white papers about the future of the church and what the church needs to do right now in order to survive. No one knew the answer, but plenty of people had an opinion. Now, I heard an interview with Ethan Hawke on the radio in Fresh Air. It was one of those days where Terry Gross is taking a break and Dave Davies was filling in. And, just a little pro tip. If you ever find yourself in a situation, in a conversation with someone, you don't know, it's an awkward conversation, the person's really not all that talkative, just imagine that you're Terry Gross interviewing the person. People will talk, they'll be amazed. You'll be amazed at what people will tell you if you go in with that approach. Now, so Dave Davies is interviewing Ethan Hawke, and he's talking to Ethan Hawke about the young man that starred in the show, The Good Lord Bird, the adaptation of the James McBride novel. If you haven't read the book, oh my gosh, it's amazing. And the television series is quite, it's interesting. I've enjoyed it. Lori didn't like it, but that's okay. But anyways, he's talking about the young man, the actor who plays Onion. And Ethan Hawke said he went to his childhood acting coach and asked him, how do I help this kid? And the acting coach said this: you have to have the young man repeat this one line, and until he repeats this one line with sincerity and means every word of it, nothing can happen. And the line was simply this: I don't know anything. I don't know anything. Now think for a second in your life the hours wasted on bravado, trying to act like you knew what you were doing. Or think about the hours spent nurturing your fragile ego, thinking that you knew what you were doing. Just start with that line, I don't know anything. And it's amazing how open you are to the situation and the possibilities before you. The pandemic stripped away any pretense for any church to know or to act or to think it knew what it was doing. It was a rare gift to discover the Spirit of God in the midst of the pandemic by simply saying, I don't know what we are doing. It was like sitting in the sanctuary on Christmas Eve. All the lights are out in complete darkness. And you look around and you can't see anybody else's face. You almost forget what the sanctuary looks like or who's around you. And one by one, the candles are lit. And one by one, you start to get a sense of the picture of the place that you're in. You don't know everything, but you kind of get a sense of it. We started with that notion, and there, early on in the pandemic, that we don't know what we're doing. And slowly but surely, one light was lit, and another was lit, and another was lit, and another, and we started to get this picture of what we're doing. I like to think that the pandemic was an accelerator. If your church was on shaky ground, then you probably didn't make it through the pandemic. Some churches have closed already because of this, and I would say that many more will close after churches open back up for in-person worship. I think there's just been too much pain, too much loss, too much trauma, too much tragedy. And if you weren't in a healthy situation before that, it's really hard to weather that. The converse is also true, that if you were healthy before the pandemic, then you made it through okay. And I would say that I've talked with a lot of other healthy churches. They're not only made it, they're actually a little bit better, healthier at this time than they were maybe a year ago. I would say that's true for Judson Church. So in this room that I'm in right now, a year ago, we said that we don't know what we're doing. All we're going to do is try to take care of one another. And in that act, as I look back a year from then, I can see the seeds that were already sprouting of a new Judson Church at that time. Now that Sunday, Brad, who was the moderator at the time, took the directory and kind of just divided it up and to the church council members said, you're in charge of like A through C, and you're in charge of D through F, and you're in charge of F through L, and on down the line. And with simple things, call everybody on the list and check in on them weekly. Now, it sounds simple and it sounds obvious, but that move shifted how we operated as a community. Everyone on the church council was forced to extend care and compassion beyond their own selves and their own family. Later on, when stimulus checks were then issued, many people started calling me up and saying, I'd like to donate some or all of it to members of the church who may be experiencing financial hardships or who will be experiencing financial hardships. We didn't have anything even set up in place, so we got that set up in place as quick as possible. Now, have we done a perfect job of keeping track of everybody and extending care and compassion? No. Yeah, but we've done a pretty amazing job, I think, as a congregation. There are plenty of people I wish that I did have the time and energy to call and be with, and I know that goes through lots of people. But we're trying. I can only promise you this. You are in my prayers every day. And every morning and evening when I wake up and I say my prayers, I remember you, and your names are said, and I know your heart and my heart are together in this endeavor. And I know that's happening with other people as well. But we're trying. We don't know what we're doing, but we're figuring it out light by light. In my time as a pastor in New Orleans, I learned one observable truth for church life. In times of crisis, churches that turn inward die, and churches that turn outward thrive. On the corner on May 25th, on the corner of Chicago Avenue and 38th Street, George Floyd was killed, and our cities and the world responded. Some of you attended marches and rallies and vigils. Some of you have got a quick lesson on how to check and why you need to check white privilege. But all of us decided to be a part of the solution and to no longer be part of the problem of systemic racism in our city, in our church, the way we operate and live our lives. We found new ways to be active and form relationships in the midst of curfews and lockdowns and a fast-spreading virus. We found that maybe one of the best things we could do is just give money to local nonprofits and organizations. We gave over $30,000. We formed relationships with individuals and churches and nonprofits who were doing this kind of work. Yes, the church was, yes, the church during this time, also, yes, the church was graffitied. Tom and Barb Balcom quickly cleaned it up. Yes, at this time, someone tried to start a fire on the Harriet Avenue doors. But all that did not stop this church from turning outward. That could have been a signal to say, hey, we need to almost make the church as secure as possible. I'm going to talk a little bit in the future, in a little bit in the sermon. Pope Francis gave an image of what he thought the church should be at this time. And this was right after he became Pope. He said the church needs to stop thinking of the church as a mighty fortress. The church at this time is a field hospital. That's a different shift from a fortress mentality to a field hospital mentality. We could have at that time gone back to the fortress mentality. But the church started acting like a field hospital. This work of turning outward, not being solely turned inward, I want to tell you, it has been both exhausting and exhilarating. I don't know about you, but every day around 7 p.m., I'm done. I have no energy left. Every morning it feels like there's too much blood in my caffeine system, as Johnny Cash would say. I don't have the capacity to really read heavy books, only biographies, some crime fiction, and maybe some light fiction. And if it weren't for the daily prayer book, Give Us This Day, that comes out of college, liturgical press, I don't know where my inner life would be. I think it'd be in turmoil. And yet, despite all this, this has been one of the most rewarding and satisfying years of ministry ever. Because every time I have felt, oh, we're doomed, or this will never get done, or I can't do this all by myself, or I know God is present here in the midst of this church and in the midst of our work, but I just don't see it happening anymore. Every time I kind of feel like I'm in that corner, one of you reminds me of abundance. An unexpected donation arrives. A call is made just to check in. An inspiring card arrives in the mail. Someone drops off cookies on my step. On and on and on. New energy emerges, and new relationships start, and new partnerships spring up, and new ideas blossom. It's been amazing in that regard. And we've been able to prove to ourselves and prove to our community that we can walk and chew gum at the same time. By that I mean, look, we can grieve and do the work of social justice. We can take care of one another, and we can make the circle wider. We can lament, and we can plan for the future. We can be scattered, and we can continue to do the work of God. We can make room at the table and make a difference. We can offer a freedom school or Carolyn's Zoom meditations and install solar panels. We can incorporate technology into our worship, and we can help people. We can help people be fed, be housed, and be healed. Now, we found a new experience of the Spirit of God among us, not by looking inward, but by looking outward. A couple weeks ago, there circulated a blog post, an entry in the pastor world on what will happen when we can return. The question was kind of, will the congregation be here when we are able to be back in person? And the person who wrote this, the author, said, instead of asking that question, ask these 6 questions instead. Number 1, have we represented Jesus well during the lockdown? You can tell this person had some experiences in the UK. Number 2, are we representing Jesus well now that we come out of the lockdown? Number 3, what have we learned and what are we still learning? Number 4, how can we better serve the people at home? Number 5, how well are we serving our online church members and visitors? And number 6, how are people hurting and what can we do to help them? Now, if you need these 6, I'll have them in a link below on the comment section. Now, as I read the gospel lesson for this week, and thank you again, Rich, for reading that. That was kind of on the spot. He was here, and I was like, hey, how about reading the gospel lesson? Sure. As Rich was reading the gospel, as the gospel lesson, as I was reading it this week, the question kept resonating in my mind, that last question. How are people hurting, and what can we do to help them? And the question kept coming back. That story in John is a story between Jesus and Nicodemus. And Nicodemus comes to Jesus with the attitude that he knows everything. And Jesus slowly reveals, you don't know everything, and I'm going to show you a different way of being a human being. So help me out here. Or not help me out, hear me out. Churches, like Judson, have done a great job of risk management. We have been par excellence at being risk averse. In fact, we have exceeded all expectations for being risk averse. I have watched and done it myself. People, good, faith-filled people run from conflict, erase risk, and more importantly, ignore pain. But the pandemic has left us nowhere to hide. Either we go to the pain and find life, or we continue to run from it and die. Last week, Pope Francis visited Iraq. Those people that kind of advised Pope Francis told him not to do it. It was too risky. They tried to talk him out of it. But he went anyway. He especially went to northern Iraq, to sites, to churches and sites that were targeted by ISIS. And he went to one church in particular, Our Lady of Salvation. Now there, 11 years ago, in October of 2010, during an evening church service, ISIS stormed in and started to fire their weapons at random. There were two priests serving the church. They came and said, "We offer ourselves as a sacrifice. Take our lives, but spare the others." ISIS shot and killed them immediately, and then continued their rampage of terror by shooting the men first, and then the women and children. Miraculously, some people survived. The pictures of the horror are just unbearable to look at. Bodies in the midst of the pews, blood over the walls, just a broken, shattered stained glass, bullet holes in the wall. It's just terrible to look at. That was the church that Pope Francis went to, especially to celebrate Mass. He went to where the pain was. And there, in the midst of that pain, he wanted to proclaim healing and life. Or think of the 9/11 responders. Or think about, just picture that. After the Twin Towers in 9/11, everybody in the city that could got in their cars and headed north on 95 to get out of the city. But there were first responders from New York and Connecticut that were going to the towers. There were first responders who went and started heading up the steps of the towers to help any and all they could, knowing that they would not make it. They went toward the pain. Or think of the story that ran this month of the president of Norwich University in Northfield, Vermont. Several male students died by suicide in the dorms. They said that the life in the dormitories it was so isolating that they couldn't make it anymore. So what did the president do? He moved into the dorms himself and wanted to be with his students. He wanted to do everything he could to be with the pain and help in any way he could. Or think of Don and Mary. This is a story that was collected and written by Brian Doyle. Early one morning, several teachers and staffers at a Connecticut grade school, we all know as Sandy Hook, were in a meeting. The meeting had been underway for about 5 minutes when they heard the chilling sound in the hallway. They said, "We heard a pop, pop, pop," said one of the staffers later. Most of them dove under the table. That is the reasonable thing to do, what they were trained to do, and that is what they did. But 2 of the staffers jumped, or leapt, or lunged out of their chairs and ran toward the sound of the bullets. Which word you use depends on which news account of that morning you read, but the words all point in the same direction. One of the staffers was the principal. Her name was Dawn. She had 2 daughters. Her husband had proposed to her 5 times before she finally said yes, and they had been married for 10 years. They had a vacation house on a lake. She liked to get down on her knees to paint with the littlest kids in the school. The other staffer was a school psychologist named Mary. She had 2 daughters. She was a football fan. She had been married for more than 30 years. She and her husband had a cabin on the lake. She loved to go to theater. She was due to retire in 1 year. She liked to get down on her knees to work in her garden. Don, the principal, told the teachers and the staffers to lock the doors behind them. And the teachers and the staffers did so after Don and Mary ran out into the hall. You and I have been in that hallway. We spent 7 years of our childhood in that hallway. It's friendly and echoing. And when someone opens the door at the end, a wind comes and flutters all the paintings and posters on the walls. Don and Mary jumped, or leapt, or lunged toward the sound of bullets. Every fiber of their bodies descended from millions of years of bodies that had leapt away from danger, must have wanted to dive under the table. That's what they've been trained to do. That's how you live to see another day. That's how you stay alive, to paint with the littlest kids, and work in the garden, and hug your daughters, and drive off laughing to your cabin on the lake. But they leapt for the door, and Don said, "Lock the door after us." And they lunged right at the boy with the rifle. The next time someone says the word hero to you, you say this: there once was 2 women. One was named Dawn and the other was named Mary. They had 2 daughters. They both loved to kneel down to care for small beings. They leapt from their chairs and ran right at the boy with the rifle. And if we ever forget their names, if we ever forget the wind in that hallway, if we ever forget what they did, if we ever forget that there is something in us beyond sense and reason that snarls at death and runs roaring at it to defend children, if we ever forget that all children are our children, then we are fools who have allowed memory to be murdered too. And what good are we then? What good are we then? This year, I want to say more than ever, this church started to take steps toward the pain. And because of those actions, because of those steps, this congregation will never be the same again. What mattered before? What kept us risk and pain averse in worship? What kept us safe in education? What kept us comfortable in fellowship and policies and outreach will not work in our new existence. Before the pandemic, we averaged 100 on Sunday morning. Now we are averaging 100 households. Before we averaged about 3 new members a year. This week we had 7 in our new members in inquiry class, with another 3 or 4 in waiting for the next one. Before we had no mechanism to, or even an account to give away to community members and nonprofits, and now we do. Before we had few partnerships with a few nonprofits, and now we have plenty. They're abundant. Before we scoffed at technology, and now nearly every one of you has a Zoom account, is now watching this on Vimeo or YouTube or making comments in the section below. Some of you are even making, little funny faces during the sermon. Before, after 8 years of pastoring this church, I'm sad to say I didn't even know most of the names of the neighbors of Judson. And now we have each other's cell phone numbers. Before, I don't think that many of us thought of this church. We thought of this church as a maybe church, or a could be church. And now we have found our calling as a real, good church. We don't have to wait and wish and wonder. We are being the church God called us to be right now. Inclusive, progressive, risk-taking, going toward the pain in our city. One cautionary word before I can conclude. When you go toward pain, you got to be ready that when you're in the midst of pain, you may get hurt. You probably will. You ever tried to give a cat a shot? Have you ever tried to pick up a wounded dog? Have you ever walked into a hospital room when someone just got the diagnosis of cancer? You get wounded. That's part of it. There is no safe way to do this. Have you ever been around someone in chronic pain? Maybe a back pain or, just some internal pain. They say things sometimes they don't mean. It's just the pain speaking, not them. You got to be ready for that. Craig Barnes, who's the president of Princeton Seminary, just wrote a book about, I think it's called A Pastor's Diary, or Diary of a Pastor's Soul, something like that. It was an imagined, fictive work about the last year of a pastor's life before retirement. Most of the stories were all taken out of his own experience, but he made them, made them into a work of fiction, kind of an imaginative work. The pastor is diagnosed with cancer. And the pastor has to struggle with, do I tell the congregation or not? He chooses not to tell the congregation. Not because he wasn't close to them or they didn't mean the world to him. But he didn't want to have to be in a situation where he is the wounded one, having to comfort someone because they are uncomfortable with his woundedness. Do you see what I mean? Like, sometimes when you're in the midst of pain, you don't want to put the person who's in pain, you don't want to put the burden on them of having for them to comfort you because you are uncomfortable with their pain. These are cautionary words as we go toward the pain. It's easier to be risk averse and pain averse. But it is life-giving, as we have found in this past year, to go toward that pain. To sit there and remember the word, I don't know anything. To sit there, to be with it, to wait for those candles to light up the room. Wait for the Spirit, wait for the presence of God, listen for it. It'll be there. We have found it. We've heard and been present there. God did not send Jesus to bless the status quo. And God did not call Judson Church into being for us to sit by while our neighbors weep. That text in John is a toughie, I know. And many of us kind of scoff at the kind of substitutionary atonement way of looking at it, that God has to sacrifice have to be offered. That there's one way to read that. The other way is, God is going toward the pain. And we are called to do likewise. To go toward the pain, to seek the healing, to seek the love, to seek the grace. God has called us both to go to the pain, to take risks, and to proclaim life. May we do likewise. Amen and amen.